The camp ledger for the Pocahontas Number Four mine in Tazewell County, Virginia, records the tonnage figures for every miner who worked the face in the winter of 1908. The entries are in a company clerk's hand, neat columns of names and numbers running down the page in the specific bureaucratic order of a coal company's production record. Most of the names are Scots-Irish. A few are German. Several are Italian or Polish, the immigrant miners the coal companies were bringing in from the eastern seaboard in this period to supplement the mountain workforce. And partway down the column, between a Mullins and a Fletcher, there is a name that the camp foreman had been writing into his daily reports for 3 years as the Digger. Not a first name, not a last name. The Digger, the specific diminution that the coal camp social structure applied to black miners in the Virginia and West Virginia coalfield in this period when the company needed the labor, but the camp's informal hierarchy needed a way to acknowledge that need without acknowledging the man. The tonnage figure beside the Digger's entry in that winter 1908 ledger is higher than any other figure on the page. This video is about how that happened, not just the tonnage figure, the entire life that produced it. The specific journey of a black man from a mountain hollow in southwestern Virginia to the coalface of the Pocahontas field at the exact moment in American history when the coal field was simultaneously the most integrated and the most violently segregated labor environment in the entire Appalachian mountain country. And what his bloodline carries from that time into the present. Subscribe before we start. Subscribe, hit the bell, and stay with me. The black Appalachian before the coal, before the Pocahontas field opened, before the railroad reached the southwestern Virginia mountain country in the 1880s and changed what the mountains were for. There was already a black Appalachian community that the standard narrative of Appalachian history does not always acknowledge as having existed. The free black population of the southwestern Virginia mountain counties predates the Civil War. It predates the coal industry by generations. It traces in some cases to the specific legal and social circumstances of the Virginia mountain country in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, when the distance from the plantation economy of the Virginia tidewater and the specific character of the mountain community produced conditions under which free black individuals and families built lives in the mountain hollows alongside the Scots-Irish and German families that the standard Appalachian origin story is built around. The 1850 federal census for Tazewell County, Virginia, shows free black individuals listed as farmers and laborers in the mountain community. The 1860 census shows the same. These were not large numbers. The free black population of the southwestern Virginia mountain counties in the antebellum period was a small fraction of the total county population. But it was there. It was built in community structures, churches, and mutual aid arrangements, and family networks in the same mountain terrain that the Scots-Irish and German communities were building theirs. The man who would eventually be called the Digger in the Pocahontas Number Four ledger was the grandson of one of those free black families. His grandfather had been born free in Tazewell County around 1830. His father had been born free in the same county around 1855, and he had been born in a specific hollow in the mountain country of southwestern Virginia around 1878, 20 years before the coal company arrived to change what the hollow was. The hollow where his family had been farming since his grandfather's time sat on the edge of the Pocahontas coal field. The coal was beneath the hollow floor. The family did not know this in 1878. Nobody in the hollow knew this. What they knew was that the bottomland along the creek was good for corn, and the slopes above it were good for livestock, and the timber on the ridges above the slopes could be sold to the lumber operations that had been moving through the mountain country since the 1870s. The hollow was what it had always been, a place where a family was building something across generations in the specific way that mountain hollow families build things, slowly and practically and without much outside acknowledgement. The railroad reached the edge of the Pocahontas field in 1883. The coal company agents arrived shortly afterward. What the Pocahontas field was. The Pocahontas coal field in the mountain country of Tazewell County, Virginia, and McDowell County, West Virginia, was one of the richest coal seam systems in the entire Appalachian mountain country. The Pocahontas seam, the primary coal seam of the field, ran 4 to 10 feet thick through the mountain interior. A seam of such consistent quality and such accessible character from the mountain terrain that the coal operators who opened the field in the 1880s described it as the best metallurgical coal in the world. The Pocahontas coal powered the blast furnaces of the expanding American steel industry. It powered the United States Navy. It was the specific coal that the industrial economy of the late 19th century needed most, and that the Pocahontas field provided in quantities that made the field's operators among the most profitable businesses in the American South. The labor that mined the Pocahontas coal was recruited from everywhere the coal companies could find it. The Scots-Irish and German mountain families who had been in the surrounding hollow communities since the post-revolutionary settlement were the first pool, but the mountain families alone could not supply the labor volume that the expanding production required, and the coal companies in the Pocahontas field, like the coal companies across the southern Appalachian coalfield in this period, turned to additional labor sources. Italian and Polish immigrants recruited from the ports of the eastern seaboard, and black workers recruited from the communities of southwestern Virginia and the broader mid-Atlantic region. The specific racial dynamic of the Pocahontas coal field in the 1890s and 1900s was different from the racial dynamic of either the plantation South or the industrial North. The underground work of coal mining required a specific kind of labor cooperation that the surface world's racial hierarchy found difficult to maintain below ground. Two men working the same coal face, one loading coal while the other drills and shoots, cannot afford to apply the social hierarchy of the surface world to the decisions they make about supporting the roof above them and moving the coal out of the entry. The underground cooperation that the work required produced a specific kind of relationship between black and white miners in the Pocahontas field that the camp's surface social structure was simultaneously trying to prevent. The coal companies navigated this tension in specific ways: separate housing in the company town, separate churches, which in many cases meant no church for black miners because the company would not build one. Separate entries in some mines where the company kept black and white miners in different sections of the same mine to minimize underground contact. And the specific language of the camp, the foreman's daily reports, and the company ledger's naming conventions that recorded black miners without surnames when the company's social structure required it. As the digger rather than as the man whose full name appears in the county record that the coal company never consulted. The man at the face. He started at the Pocahontas Number 4 in 1905. He was 27 years old. He had come to the camp from the hollow where his family had been farming for 3 generations, following the same route that thousands of mountain hollow families were following in this period, as the coal economy converted the mountain interior from an agricultural community to a mining community. His family's hollow had been bought by the coal company in 1899. The surface rights retained by his father under the broad form deed arrangement that the coal companies were using across the field. The mineral rights transferred to the company for a payment that his father had understood as money for the coal, and that the company understood as authorization to mine in ways that would make the farming impossible. His father's farm survived another 5 years after the mineral rights transfer. By 1904, the company's mining operations beneath the hollow floor had damaged the water table enough that the creek the family had been drawing from was no longer reliable, and the subsidence in the fields above the worked-out sections of the seam had made the bottomland corn ground unusable. His father moved the family to the company town. His father worked the entry-level jobs the company provided for older men and for men without the specific physical capacity the coalface required. And he went to the face. The coalface is the specific place in a mine where the coal is actually extracted. Everything else in the mine operation, the haulage and the timbering and the ventilation and the maintenance of the entry roads, is support work. The face is where the tonnage is produced. A man who works the face successfully, who develops the specific combination of physical strength and technical skill and tactical intelligence about the coal seam's behavior that the work requires, produces tonnage. The tonnage is what the company pays for and what the company ledger records. Everything else about a man, his name, his bloodline, his history, is secondary to the tonnage figure in the weekly production record. He was good at the face. Specifically, technically, documentably good. The coal seam in his section of the Number 4 mine had a specific character, a role in the seam that made it harder to work efficiently than the sections other miners had been assigned. A role in a coal seam is a place where the seam's thickness changes, sometimes dramatically over a short horizontal distance, producing a working height that varies from the comfortable standing height a miner expects to a height that requires crawling and contorting and working in positions that reduce efficiency and increase the physical toll of the shift. The miners who had worked his section before him had lower production numbers than the mine's average, and the company had concluded that the section was a lower producing section. He concluded something different. He spent his first 2 months at the face not maximizing his tonnage but learning the role. Where it went up, where it went down, where the coal on the high side of the roll broke differently from the coal on the low side. How to position his cutting so that the shot worked with the roll's natural structure rather than against it. He was doing something that the experienced white miners in the section had not done because they had not stayed in the section long enough to develop the understanding. They had taken the production loss from the roll as a given and worked against it. He took the roll as information and worked with it. By his 3rd month at the Number 4, his weekly tonnage was above the camp average. By his 6th month, it was the highest in his section. By the winter of 1908, when the camp ledger recorded the figures that this video began with, his entry in the production record was the highest figure on the page, the black miners who built the southern coalfield. The man at the Pocahontas Number 4 was not exceptional in his presence in the southern Appalachian coalfield. He was representative of a population that the standard history of the American coal industry has consistently underrepresented. The United States Coal Commission report of 1923 estimated that black miners constituted approximately 20% of the total workforce in the West Virginia coalfields in the early decades of the 20th century. In specific counties of the Pocahontas field, the percentage was higher. McDowell County, West Virginia. The county on the West Virginia side of the same coalfield system that the Number 4 mine was part of had a black population that exceeded 40% of the total county population at the height of coal production in the early 20th century. This was not a migrant workforce in the sense of a population that came temporarily and left. It was a population that built churches, schools, fraternal organizations, and family networks in the company towns and in the surviving hollow communities of the McDowell County and Tazewell County mountain country. The black Appalachian miners who built that population came from 2 distinct sources. Some came from the mountain hollow communities of southwestern Virginia and West Virginia. The free black families like the man at the Number 4 whose presence in the mountain county predated the coal industry by generations. And some came from the broader black population of Virginia and the mid-Atlantic states, recruited by the coal company's labor agents who moved through the black communities of Richmond and Roanoke and the eastern Virginia counties, offering wages that the agricultural economy of the post-Reconstruction South could not match. The coal companies recruited black labor for a specific reason that went beyond the simple need for more workers. Black miners were recruited as a countermeasure to the union organizing that the United Mine Workers of America was conducting in the southern Appalachian coalfield in the 1890s and 1900s. The company towns that housed black miners, separate from white miners, were designed partly to prevent the interracial solidarity that the UMWA's organizing strategy depended on. The companies believed, based on their reading of the racial dynamics of the post-Reconstruction South, that black and white miners would not organize together. They were sometimes wrong about this. The UMWA's organizing in the southern Appalachian coalfield in the early 20th century produced specific moments of interracial labor solidarity that the coal company's racial calculus had not anticipated. The Paint Creek and Cabin Creek strike of 1912 and 1913 in West Virginia included black miners alongside white miners in the strike action. The Battle of Blair Mountain in 1921, the largest armed labor uprising in American history, included black miners in the armed columns that marched toward Logan County before federal intervention ended the confrontation. The man at the Pocahontas Number Four worked through the period when those events were defining the labor history of the coalfield he was part of. Whether he was involved in union organizing, whether he participated in the specific labor actions of the period, whether the camp's racial structure kept him at the margin of the UMWA activity that was reshaping the coalfield around him, the ledger does not record. The ledger records tonnage. The man's tonnage was the highest figure on the page in the winter of 1908. What he did with the rest of his life in that camp is in the county records and in the oral tradition of the Black Appalachian community and in the DNA of the descendants who are still in the mountain country today. What the camp did with that fact, the coal company's production record, is not a document of human achievement. It is a document of coal company interest. The figure beside the digger's entry in the winter 1908 ledger was significant to the company in one specific way. It represented coal that had been mined and revenue that would be generated. What the company did with the figure beyond that depended on the specific management decisions of the Pocahontas Number Four's operating structure. The camp foreman, whose daily reports had been calling him the digger for 3 years, continued calling him the digger. The production figure did not change the foreman's language. It did not change the housing assignment in the company town, which placed him in the section of company housing designated for black workers, a section whose physical condition the company maintained at a lower standard than the housing it provided for white miners. It did not change his position in the mine's formal hierarchy, which the company's racial policy fixed at the facework level rather than allowing advancement to the supervisory positions that exceptional production performance sometimes opened for white miners. What the production figure did change was the way the other miners at the Number Four thought about the section of the mine he was working. The Scots, Irish, and German miners who had been in the section before him and had accepted the role's production penalty as unavoidable were now working in a camp where the ledger showed that the role was not unavoidable. The digger had found a way through it. The knowledge of how to work the role, which he had developed over 2 months of systematic observation and which he carried in the specific combination of physical memory and tactical intelligence that the facework required, was knowledge that the camp's social structure was not designed to transfer across the racial line. He did not withhold it. The specific way he worked the role, the positioning and the cutting sequence and the shot placement that extracted the maximum tonnage from the difficult section, was visible to any miner who worked alongside him or in the adjacent section. The Scots-Irish miners who worked near him observed it. The Italian miners who were in the adjacent section observed it. What the camp's social structure prevented was the formal acknowledgement that the technique had originated with the digger, the black miner whose production figure topped the winter 1908 ledger. The bloodline behind the face, the man at the Pocahontas Number Four face in 1908, was carrying a specific bloodline into that coal camp that the company's ledger recorded only as the digger. The bloodline is traceable in the Tazewell County records that predate the coal industry, in the free black community records of the antebellum Mountain County, and in the specific DNA markers that the genetic genealogy research on black Appalachian families is now beginning to document with the same precision that the research on Scots-Irish and German Appalachian bloodlines has been, applying for the past decade. His grandfather's Tazewell County free black community had roots that the antebellum census records do not fully document, but that the oral tradition of the black Appalachian community and the specific DNA markers of his descendants begin to reveal. The free black families of the southwestern Virginia mountain counties in the antebellum period were not a culturally uniform group. They included families whose freedom traced to manumission by mountain county slaveholders who were operating in the specific social context of the Virginia mountain community rather than the plantation tidewater. They included families whose freedom traced to the specific legal circumstances of mixed heritage individuals who had navigated the racial classification system of the Virginia mountain county in ways that produced free status. And they included families with Cherokee ancestry from the same mountain hollow communities that the Scots-Irish and German founding-era settlers had shared with the Cherokee. families whose mixed heritage included both African American and Native American components alongside European ancestry. The DNA of Black Appalachian families from the southwestern Virginia mountain counties shows this specific complexity in the testing results that the commercial platforms are now producing. A contemporary descendant of the Tazewell County free Black community of the antebellum period might show African ancestry in the majority, Cherokee or broader Native American ancestry in a measurable secondary percentage, and European ancestry, both British Isles and occasionally Germanic Europe. In the third component that reflects the specific social history of the southwestern Virginia Mountain Hollow community before the coal industry arrived to reorganize it. The man at the coal face was carrying all of that. The company ledger called him the digger. The county records from his grandfather's time called his family free-colored. The DNA of his descendants calls his bloodline something more specific and more complicated than either of those designations, something that the three bloodline character of the Appalachian Mountain Hollow community produced in ways that the mountain community's own documentary record has been slow to acknowledge. What the Pocahontas field left behind. The Pocahontas Number Four mine operated until 1940. The coal seam that the man at the face had learned to work so efficiently in 1908 was worked out by the late 1920s, and the mine shifted its operations to other sections and eventually to other entries until the economically recoverable coal in the Number Four was gone. The Black mining community that the Pocahontas field had assembled in the company towns of Tazewell County and McDowell County dispersed in the same period that the coal economy contracted. Some families moved to the industrial cities of the North in the Great Migration. Some moved to other coal fields in the region where production was still expanding, and some stayed in the mountain communities, in the hollow communities that the coal company had bought and mined and left behind, farming whatever the mining operations had left of the bottomland that the broad form deed had separated from the surface rights their families had retained. The man who had topped the Pocahontas Number Four production ledger in the winter of 1908 stayed in the mountain country. His children stayed. His grandchildren stayed. They are documented in the Tazewell County records of the mid-20th century as residents of the mountain community that the coal economy had transformed and was now abandoning. The company that had called him the digger was gone. The mine was closed. The company town was decaying. The hollow where his grandfather had farmed before the mineral rights were sold was not farmable in the way it had been before the mining. What remained was the bloodline, the specific DNA that he had carried to the coalface in 1908, and that he passed to his children, and that his grandchildren passed to their children. The Cherokee ancestry from the Mountain Hollow founding era, the African ancestry from the free Black community that had been in the southwestern Virginia mountain country since before the Civil War, the European ancestry from the specific social history of the Virginia mountain community that the antebellum free Black families had been part of, and the specific technical knowledge, the understanding of how to read a coal seam's character and work with its structure rather than against it, that the winter 1908 production ledger had recorded as the highest figure on the page, without recording whose knowledge it was. The company's ledger called him the digger. His name is in the Tazewell County records. His bloodline is in the DNA of his descendants, and the coal seam he learned to work better than anyone else in the camp is worked out now. The mountain above it settled into the shape that the extraction left it in. But the knowledge is not worked out. The specific intelligence of reading a landscape structure and working with it rather than against it, which he had applied to the roll in the Number Four seam, and which his grandfather had applied to the hollow's creek bottom, and which the long chain of mountain hollow knowledge that his bloodline carried had been applying to. The specific terrain of the southwestern Virginia mountain country for generations before the coal company arrived, that is not in the ledger. It is in the bloodline. Subscribe if this video gave you something to sit with. Every week on this channel, we go this deep into the communities that the standard Appalachian story leaves out, and the records and the DNA are now finding. Subscribe, like this video, hit the notification bell, and leave a comment below with your Black Appalachian family county and what the records show about when your family was there. Because the records go back further than most people have looked, and the bloodlines go back further than the records.